Hey, what's up guys? John here. I have Jason Hartman on today, and me and Jason, we spoke heavily about what's actually going on in the world, the real estate market, where everything's going, what's going to happen over the next couple of years, where he sees things going, where I see things going. He does a lot of real estate investing nationally. He has a network of people that are investing nationally, and he brings a pretty unique perspective, so I think you're going to enjoy this show. So without further ado, let's begin. Hey, what's up guys? So I have Jason Hartman on the show today. Jason, he's been in the business for decades, absolutely crushing it in real estate, really unique and interesting perspective on the economy and what's going on. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You're going to learn a lot. I'm going to learn a lot. It's going to be a great talk. Hey, Jason, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, John. Yeah. And nice to meet you in person. I've been watching your videos for years. And I remember when you lived in Los Angeles and you were just doing these videos about Gavin Newsom and, the California disaster as it unfolds. So
yeah, those videos, it's funny. It kind of made my channel initially. Yeah. I did one video called Downtown LA is Now Hell. And it was when I lived in Los Angeles.
And it's becoming a worse hell now.
It got 2 million views and I'm like, this is absolutely crazy. Yeah. How many people agreed with what was happening in Los Angeles has only just continued to increase over time. A lot of people are, I think, fed up and just kind of pissed off about the direction LA is going.
It is, the state is committing suicide.
Yeah.
Okay. And nations are also committing. It's shocking to me that these people are just ruining these places. I mean, they are ruining them. If you look at Detroit, which I call the poster child for the disaster of big government, right? California's following the model of Detroit. It's just terrible to see it. And I'm from California. I grew up in Los Angeles, lived in Orange County as an adult, and then left about 12 years ago and moved to Scottsdale, Arizona first, and then have since, every time I move east, I lower my tax rate.
Further away.
Now it's zero, state-wise,
So you were saying that they've reduced bail, in terms of zero cash bail.
Yeah, Los Angeles now is following the lead of, I guess, San Francisco, because they've decided that somehow, criminality is, if you prosecute it, if you charge bail to let people out of jail, that's racist, I guess.
Yeah.
And so there's just no accountability.
They have to combat inequality.
Yeah, of course. And now you're going to watch the crime rate in LA is going to just soar. I mean, look, I remember years ago I read this great book. It's a little tiny book. It's out of print, I'm sure, but everybody should get it. It's called The Greatest Management Principle in the World by Michael LeBeau, or Michael LeBeau, however you say it. And he had this saying in it, I always remember, what gets rewarded gets repeated. What gets rewarded gets repeated. Every area of life is true of that, whether you're raising children or running society or everything, employees, everything in between. What gets rewarded gets repeated. And they're rewarding all of the worst things humans do instead of the best things humans do. So it's just a disaster. And, I always talk about on my show how 1990 was the peak of civilization, in my opinion, because before 1990 and before, it was cool to be a winner.
Yeah.
That was the rewarded thing. But ever since then, it became cool to be like an urban gangbanger, a street thug. All of this sort of loserdom became cool.
Yeah.
And look at where we are, right?
Yeah. So we were I was building, when I say we, me and my wife were building these units in Los Angeles a few years ago. And there was a few units in the back, and it was off this alley. And the alley always kind of attracted kind of shady people, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so I had my buddy staying in the house in the back. He was, just moved to LA, and he didn't want to rent. I'm like, hey, you could live here for free. Yeah. Brand new appliances, basically a brand new unit. We were just about to get the certificate of occupancy. Okay. I was kind of sketched out that, someone's going to hop the fence and jack all my appliances, strip the plumbing, destroy the unit. I was like, you can stay here. The guy's an MMA fighter. He's built like a brick house.
He'll
nobody wants problems with this guy.
Right, yeah.
He has cauliflower ear like this. He just looks like a problem. Yeah. Even now we go out to a restaurant, people will point him out. Oh, how long you been fighting? Yeah. Anyway, people broke in.
What happened?
People broke in. And then they were greeted with this brick house inside.
Right. Yeah.
And Steve detained this one guy who was 6 foot something, maybe 6'2". It was huge.
Yeah.
My friend Steve's only 5'8".
And your MMA fighter tenant, who was friend, who was taking care of what did they do? Prosecute him for detaining the criminal?
No, they detained him, and then they called the cops. The guy couldn't leave.
Yeah.
The cops came, and it was basically a catch and release. It was
no
nothing.
No
but
penalty.
They would have destroyed the unit. It was a $300,000 project in the back. But yeah, that's just LA for you now.
Yep. It's
And that was in 2020.
California, New York.
It's only gotten worse.
Every left-wing place just becomes a disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder how this whole thing is actually going to play out for California. A lot of people think that, this is where it's going to end. I personally think it's just the beginning for California.
I think California's on a death spiral, sadly, and it breaks my heart to say that. It's a beautiful state.
Yeah.
I mean, the natural beauty of California is absolutely incredible. It's much more beautiful than Florida, but it's just the government is so bad. It's just treacherous, really.
Yeah, I had a situation in California, and this is like kind of one of the main reasons we were thinking about leaving initially. When everything was shut down in 2020, they took the swings off the swing sets. I have at the time I had like a 6-month-old.
Wow.
Yeah. I had a 6-month-old. We like take him a little playground.
God forbid you should go outside, get sunshine and vitamin D, and go to the park.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not in closed environment. Like, why would they close the park?
Yeah.
It's the exact opposite of what you should be doing. But
so then we're like, okay, we can't go to the parks, and then the next month or two, I ended up getting sued for $2 million from a tenant in Los Angeles. It was like the craziest situation.
Okay.
I ended up getting sued by this tenant that I actually paid money. We did a legal buyout with my attorney. She had a city-appointed attorney. I paid the tenant $12,600 to relocate. She took the money. She left.
Like a cash for keys deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
We signed a contract. I'm like, okay, cool. Everything's good. She ends up finding me on social media later, and she's like, oh, because that was like 2016.
You're a high-profile guy. Deep pockets, she thinks.
Yeah, and then she's like, boom, city comes, like, all right, $2 million lawsuit. I had my insurance basically handle it. It like went away. But they're like, it's not because of anything. It's just the optics because of where Los Angeles is now.
Yeah.
You being who you are and the tenant being who she is,
right,
it's going to blow up in your face potentially.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things we constantly say to real estate investors. You must invest in landlord-friendly markets.
Yeah.
Like I said before, what gets rewarded gets repeated. I mean, you discourage investing, you discourage investment, you do rent control, you make it that whenever you have to hold a tenant accountable to pay the rent or honor the lease, you're the big evil landlord when you go in front of a judge, and they're the virtuous, great tenant, right? And so guess what? In all of those areas, you have massive housing shortages. Mm-hmm. Any area where rent control has been tried, it's been a complete disaster.
Yeah, they're always the most expensive markets. New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It's like who wants to be an operator or build there?
No investor would ever go into this area. There's like no incentive. They're discouraging investment. So you get shortages. And just invest in landlord-friendly markets.
What are a couple of your favorite markets right now?
We like, obviously, Florida right here. There are many markets in Florida that make sense. Some of them are way too expensive and they don't make sense. One of the metrics we really follow is what's called the rent-value ratio, or RV ratio for short. And so you want your value of that property to be relatively low, entry-level housing, so that the rents in proportion to the value are high. And so that rent-to-value ratio is good in some Florida markets. It's getting more and more out of whack as prices have gone up. Alabama is much better than Florida, so we're doing a lot of business in Alabama right now. Some markets in Tennessee. It's a small market, but Little Rock, Arkansas, we do a little business there. We used to do a lot of business in all the Texas markets, and we help investors buy mostly single-family homes in different markets around the country. We've helped thousands of clients do this for the last 18 years. And so you want to be in these landlord-friendly markets with good rent-to-value ratios. When you look at the real estate market, it's common for people to hear in the media the real estate market or the housing market. And I don't know what that means, John. Mm-hmm. Does it mean Miami, Los Angeles, New York, Boston? What does it really mean?
Right.
Right? You can divide the country, or really the whole world, into three basic types of markets: linear markets, cyclical markets, and hybrid markets. And we like these low-cost linear markets where the properties make sense from day one, rent-to-value ratios are good, and they're always landlord-friendly.
Mm-hmm. So do you do Section 8? Do you do any type of like...
A little bit, not too much. So Section 8 is a government housing assistance program. And my mom had some Section 8 rentals when I was a kid growing up. So I used to sort of see her perils of dealing with them and so forth. You get a lower quality tenant most of the time in a Section 8 property. But the good side is the rent is either all or mostly paid for by the government. Mm-hmm. And so they're a pretty stable tenant. They always pay. But the dollars they pay in keep depreciating with inflation, of course, because They're printing the money to pay the rent, but that's another discussion. And, I used to say, as much as my mom complained, she complained all the way to the bank.
Yeah.
So you can do well with Section 8. Our investors mostly don't like Section 8. They like a little bit higher class tenant in a higher quality property. You can make money in any area of real estate. You just got to know what you're doing and probably pick a specialty.
So what type of return would you consider like as a not too high, not too low, but a good entry?
Well, like rent to value ratio. So at the best point to buy, which was probably 2012. Okay, we were actually selling properties in Missouri, for example, and people were buying through our network, and they would get 1.4 to 1.8 rent to value ratio. So what does that mean? A $100,000 property would rent for $1,400 a month, or maybe even $1,800 a month. That was insanely good. But the downside was it was very hard to get financing, and people were scared. They were thinking, oh my God, we're not out of the Great Recession yet. Things are going to get worse again. The market's already peaked out. And so a lot of people wouldn't pull the trigger. Those who did made a lot of money. They did really well. And pre-COVID, you could do 1% pretty well. $100,000 house, $1,000 a month. $200,000, $2,000 a month, right? Just double it for the numbers. But now you're really looking mostly at about a 0.7 to 0.8. Maybe you'll get 0.9 or even 1% sometimes, but that's rare on a high quality property. You get the cheaper properties that are falling apart, older houses that are like lower end C and D class properties. Those have better ratios, but the reality is that is hidden from most people is it usually doesn't actually perform as well in real life because those rents are harder to collect.
All right.
And those tenants are just an inferior quality of tenant.
So what do you think is going to happen with the housing market?
Oh, God, that's a $1 trillion question, and it's a big one. I think there are, first of all, 3 housing markets, okay, not one. So housing is geographical, all real estate is local, but it's also linear, cyclical, or hybrid. So before I answer, let me just kind of tee that up and explain what that means. Linear markets are the markets we like. These are markets that are, if you're looking at a chart of appreciation or depreciation over time, right? You've got the 2 X and Y axis, and those markets will sort of go along pretty consistently and pretty well. They have little ups and downs, not very pronounced as the economy bounces around. Linear markets. Nothing too impressive. They don't get much attention in the news media because they're really not that exciting. They're kind of boring. Cyclical markets are the opposite. You're looking at that chart, it looks like a roller coaster, okay? Los Angeles, where we're both from, is a cyclical market. Glorious highs, really ugly lows. Cyclical markets do not make sense. They never have good RV or rent to value ratios. They're almost always tenant-friendly, not landlord-friendly. They're almost always left-wing environments, not right-wing or conservative environments. And so they don't make sense. Hybrid markets are in between the two. Look at the country. The west coast of the United States, mostly cyclical market. The expensive northeastern markets, New York, Washington, D.C., Boston, cyclical. Miami, cyclical. Fort Lauderdale, where we, near where we are, Boca, cyclical. Okay? The rest of the country is pretty much linear. As Hillary Clinton likes to call them, the flyover states. Insulting, right? But those are mostly linear markets. There's a few hybrids in there. Austin, Texas, Denver, Colorado. Phoenix used to be hybrid. I would even say Phoenix now is a cyclical market. Okay? So cyclical markets are going to fare badly, and they probably have more pain coming. Linear markets have held up really well during these massive interest rate increases. I mean, housing affordability has plummeted. It's the worst it's been in about 37 years. And everybody watching or listening to this has to be amazed that this asset class has held up as well as it has.
Yeah, I am.
I mean, it's shown tremendous resilience in the face of almost tripling the cost of money. I mean, think about that. The cost of money on a mortgage has almost tripled from the bottom, right? So that is truly amazing. Now, a lot of people, including you, and you've done some great analysis on your channel, like to analyze the housing market in all of these different ways. I heard your recent video, which was really well done, about the 20 million homes, right? And these things are very complex. Because, of course, you have retiring baby boomers, you have different people moving into household formation years, you have all these different demographic cohorts, Gen Z, Gen X, baby boomers, whatever, and it's a very complicated thing. But at the end of the day, no matter how much you analyze how unaffordable housing is, how much payments have changed, people retiring or moving into their prime household formation years, the thing we have to know is that there is a certain supply of housing that is hard to disrupt because housing is a low-tech asset class. Look, there's a lot of disruption in this. This is a phone, right? These things get so much better every time the new one comes out. But housing is pretty much the same as it was a couple hundred years ago. In fact, I had one guest on my show who said the biggest technological disruption in housing construction in the last 100 years is the nail gun. Like, just ponder that for a moment. It's a low-tech asset. It's hard to disrupt. Of course, there's 3D printing. That's not appearing to be the disruptor. Houses are made of atoms, not bits. And atoms are expensive. They require resources to be dug out of the ground. They require trees to be cut. They require sand to be moved to make concrete, whatever, right? These are, they're hard to disrupt. So the likelihood that there will be a whole bunch of new houses it is very low because that supply will always be constrained by energy costs or environmental policy and resources. The ability to extract and manufacture those resources. So hard to disrupt the supply side. There will be new supply, but it's hard to see that there will be 5 million new homes built, right? And remember, some of the existing home inventory becomes obsolete over time as it gets old, right? So that's the supply side of the equation. What about the demand side? Well, you have the millennial generation that's sort of been slow to get their act together. And they are finally really moving into their household formation years. They're finally getting married. They're finally having kids. And they're finally buying or renting houses. And the same with Gen Z. These are big demographic cohorts. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm in the small cohort. There's only like 46 million of my cohort, where there's 76 million baby boomers, about 80 million millennials. That's the biggest cohort ever, right? I assume you're a millennial probably. And so there is a lot of demand. Now, if housing is more unaffordable, which it is, unless interest rates go down because it's a credit-based asset, then what do people do? Right? Well, they can't afford, it's so easy to look at charts and say, okay, well, the housing payment has gone up by 30% since last year. You're not wrong. And then you just say, well, and the median income has only gone up a little bit. You're not wrong about that either. But the problem is that everybody still needs a place to live. So guess what they do? They have to compromise. They have to capitulate. They have to say, look, we can't get a 3 or 4 bedroom house with a white picket fence and a nice yard, so we're going to accept a little 2-bedroom house that's older, that's in an inferior neighborhood, that's got an inferior school district. We're just going to accept less. And that's the reality of the situation. The standard of living is what gives in the equation. But it takes a while for that to happen because the psychology of compromise takes time to play out. When people realize that their American dream isn't the American dream their parents got, it takes a while for them to come to grips with that, right? And so that's what happens. the standard of living declines. This is what bad fiscal and economic policy, or bad fiscal and monetary policy, does. This is what bad government does. This was what government spending does. It destroys the standard of living of people's lives. And that's just the sad reality of it.
Today's video is sponsored by Great Credit Fast. Do you want to invest in real estate or possibly Airbnb? Maybe you want to start and grow a company or a business or possibly get debt free. With great credit, you're able to achieve all of this and much, much more. The last thing that you want to do is borrow money from a credit card company paying 25 or 27% interest, because when you look at the real numbers and you look at what's actually happening in the economy, that's the worst strategy and it's almost a guaranteed failure. Take a look at this. So if you're borrowing $10,000 at a 27% interest rate, paying $250 a month, it's going to take about 9 years to pay this off and about $16,000 in wasted resources paid to one of these credit card companies. However, with great credit, you're able to do a balance transfer in most cases and get debt free for 0% interest and pay this off in a fraction of the time. In 2008, banks started tightening up lending restrictions, and that's exactly what they are doing now. They're getting ready to tighten up lending restrictions, meaning that if you have that low credit score, 400, 500, 600 credit score, if you're in that even low 700s, it becomes much more challenging to get access to money. But if you look at Blackstone, for example, Blackstone, they are using their credit and their relationships to raise money. They've just raised $30 billion to invest in single family rentals. If you want to invest in real estate, you want to really grow and scale during the greatest wealth transfer of all time, you're going to need great credit to do it. We would love to give you a free consultation to see how we can help you at greatcreditfast.com. That's greatcreditfast.com, or give us a call at 561-430-5900. Now back to the show.
Yeah, so I think that the last 5 years have been kind of that slow erosion of the standard of living.
Oh, and it's before the last 5 years.
No,
it's been going on for decades.
For sure,
yes.
yeah. But like the last 5 years have been much more, it's much harder to avoid. Like
Right.
people before could say, oh yeah, you know, they had two cars, okay, you know, one car, it's fine, acceptable.
Or no car.
Right?
Yeah.
But now it's like getting to a point where it's like, okay, you know, a large percentage of Americans are, you know, skipping meals and they have very little savings, if any. Most people are in debt, right? But we're at that point now to where a lot of wealth is, I believe, about the transfer. And not transfer just in like we'll reduce a little bit. No. Like we have 17 trillion in consumer debt, over $1 trillion in credit card debt, record high auto loans, record high food inflation, record high utility bills, property taxes, insurance. Everything is skyrocketing, but yet real wages are softening. So we're in this period now to where it's like, okay, well, people might think the housing market is going to crash or is not going to crash. Look, people that have money are going to make more money. Like people that have money are going to be able to take advantage of the opportunities in front. And the people that don't have money will probably ignore the message and be like, okay, it'll be fine. Everything will be, you know, what can I do? Right. But I do think that this, as you mentioned, is a debt-based asset.
No question.
As they they're going to keep interest rates elevated for longer is a belief that I have. Do you have that, or do you disagree?
You know, I don't think so. I think the Fed has to pivot, and the sacrifice they're going to make is inflation. You know, they're in a tough spot.
Well, eventually they will pivot, right? I think we're both in agreement. Like eventually they will. The question is, a lot of people thought
when
in January, they were going to pivot, right? And we're already 7 months past.
I know, I agree. I'm surprised they've taken it this far. I really am. I mean, Jerome Powell used to seem like every other Fed chair, and then he suddenly turned around and became Paul Volcker. You know, and Paul Volcker was the one Fed chair we had in modern history that was the guy that was the tight monetary policy, that we're going to raise interest rates, break the back of inflation, which he successfully did, but there was a lot of pain in doing that. And so, you know, Jerome Powell seems to be willing to give us a lot more pain. And hey, it's working.
Well, what's interesting too, it's like a lot of people like, sure, he's definitely keeping interest rates longer or higher for longer. He's taking the Volcker approach slightly, but it's as if they blame that they think they have full control to tame inflation by increasing interest rates. But at the same time, they're doing this transition to clean energy, which I think a lot of people are not talking about. But that's going to be extremely inflationary. It's going to push massive costs onto producers, farmers, everyone. That's going to get pushed onto the consumer. So if that's the case, so like, okay, we're going to tame inflation by increasing interest rates, but we're going to make everything so much more friggin' expensive over here, and we're going to keep hiking these rates because we got to combat this. It's like, how does that make any sense?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, but what it does do is cause more compromise to be required. I mean, look, by 2050, which is right around the corner, the projection is we're going to have 400 million people in the United States. We only have 332 million now. All of those people need a place to live, okay? So there is already a housing shortage. There's only 460,000 homes on the market in the country right now. What we need to be at a normal market is about 1.2 million. So think of the house that was built in, say, 1970, right? That house had crappy single pane windows. It had no energy anything in it. It had, terrible heating, probably no air conditioning. It was just a inferior house to today's house, which has, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, low E, double pane, hurricane windows, impact windows. The house today is a much higher quality house, same with cars, okay? So it's much more expensive to build that house today. And so the compromise, the thing that does is it just puts more people on the streets and makes them homeless. It makes more people, it pushes them into less house, a smaller house. And what they're doing, what all the elites are doing, is they're just simply lowering the standard of living for people. I mean, can you imagine during the great era of this country when you had the Wright brothers, when you had the Industrial Revolution, can you imagine if all these inventors and companies that were expanding, can you imagine if Henry Ford was thinking, oh my gosh, I got to worry about the environment. I can't have my assembly line because we've got to save energy and have this mentality of scarcity, right? I just got back from 5 weeks in Europe, okay? And Europe is essentially a continent built on scarcity, where America is a continent built on a country built on abundance and prosperity, right? Americans think, how do I solve the problem? How do I do it? Europeans tend to think, how do I follow the procedure? And how do I be less? How do I accept less? And look, I was born in Europe, okay? So I think I have the right to be critical of it. I love Europe. I go there pretty much every year, sometimes a couple times. And I love the culture and the food and the architecture. It's beautiful, right? But it's a disaster of socialism and political correctness. And they just, Europeans, like Obama was campaigning on there, we should be more like Europe, Oh, because why? We should have crappy little cars, live in crappy little flats, and they just have like a much lesser existence than Americans do. And humans are the resource. Humans solve the problems. And we need to not curtail their endeavors too much. We need to be more laissez-faire so they can go out and do their thing.
And create value.
Yeah, and as soon as the government gets in the way, they just create less value. What gets rewarded gets repeated, or what gets punished doesn't get repeated.
Yeah. How do you see this kind of playing out the next couple of years?
I think it really the brunt of it will be the burden will be borne by the middle class, and the middle class has just been hollowed out for decades. So this middle part, you've got the rich up here, the poor down here. The poor get taken care of by the government. The rich have loopholes galore and they exploit the system. And the middle just gets hollowed out. Yeah. And so some of them move up into the rich class. Most of them move down. And they just accept less and less and less. And, it's interesting to see in the girlfriends I've had over the years, because I remember when I was in my early 20s, I would date girls who just graduated from college with nice corporate jobs. I remember this one girlfriend I had, Leslie, she was a healthcare contract negotiator for a big insurance company. She had like a high-paying corporate job, right? Another one, chemical engineer for Dow Chemical, right? Nowadays, what do they do? Like, okay, I'm a yoga instructor. I sell some things on Etsy. I'm living at home with my parents, and I'm in my 30s.
Yeah, now they're like a boss bee.
A boss girl, right? Yeah. But really, they have no security. They mostly struggle, and a lot of them are just living at home. I mean, it's just a shocking difference. Like, they don't even know how it used to be. And once you get a couple decades under your belt as an adult, you know how it used to be. You remember it, right? And it's just not that way anymore. So people just accept less. That's what they'll do in the housing market. They don't have a choice. And none of this is good.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not saying any of it's good. I'm just saying that's the way it is.
Yeah, like I do the same thing on the channel. Like people are like, oh, they have an opinion. Well, opinions are great, but they don't matter at the bank.
Yeah.
Like you look at the facts. What do the facts say? Facts are saying, and I agree with you, that we are going to see a slow erosion.
Yeah.
I think the next 3 to 5 years are going to probably be some of the most impactful in America that we've ever seen before.
I don't disagree with you, and I think the erosion is speeding up. It's happening faster and faster. Now, the one thing we haven't talked about yet, and I'm very conflicted about this, is this, we're really at this kind of inflection point with technology, with artificial intelligence. We're on the verge maybe of having level 5 self-driving cars. You know, who knows when. We thought that would come sooner. But when it does, I mean, just transportation is one of the biggest employers in the world.
Yeah. Like shipping, distribution, Uber, Lyft, food delivery,
Everything.
just to name a few.
Yeah, I mean, just truck drivers.
Yeah.
Imagine the displacement that will occur in jobs from just transportation alone. You were mentioning before, that you hire for your business copywriters, right? I mean, after ChatGPT, November 30th of last year, do you need a copywriter
No,
anymore?
he was, I mean, the guy I mentioned to you, he was extremely overpaid, huge ego, very, very difficult to work with. It would take him forever to turn things around. It was just a challenge. It wasn't like a pleasant experience communicating with him.
Now you just go to
it's like
ChatGPT
2-3 minutes, and it's like
yeah.
far superior. After like a set of prompts, far superior than anything he could ever deliver.
Yeah, and it's free. So
Completely free.
what happens to all of these jobs? I mean, it's, there's only one job, by the way, that has gone away with all of the technological revolution that's happened in the past 100 years. One job by the Bureau of Labor Statistics statistics of jobs, right? Only one job has actually disappeared. Know what it is? Elevator operator.
Huh.
So we do it ourselves with elevators now. We push the buttons ourselves.
Yeah.
And there used to be elevator operators in every elevator, right? That was a profession. And that is gone. But every other job is still here. The famous last words of any investor is, this time it's different.
Yeah.
But maybe it really is different this time.
Yeah.
I mean, this is such a monumental tectonic shift that I don't know where it leads. I mean, I can just see a lot of people being displaced. Goldman Sachs did a report on this recently. I mean, every company, every business owner wakes up every morning thinking, how can I cut costs? How can I cut costs? How can I increase income? How can I gain market share? How can I be more efficient? How can I be leaner?
Yeah.
And
I mean, if you look at what happened in the last couple of years, it's pretty shocking with like the Great Resignation, where they really pitched this.
Yep.
Now, I see both sides. Like the world got much more expensive. People needed more money to be able to maintain the same same standard of living. Makes sense, right? But at the same time, now the economy is contracting, and now employers are looking at all their costs and they're saying, you know what, I paid 25% more for this guy than I could find right now in today's marketplace. I'm going to go reshop this price. And they're going to start reshopping across the board to reduce their overall expenses, right? And now with this integration of AI, they're going to continue to do that more and more and more and more. But what I think is ultimately going to happen, I read an article, I think it was Fortune, was saying by 2030, 800 million jobs will be displaced. So if you have a population of 8 billion, and let's pretend every single person in the world had a job, that'd be 10% of the overall.
Only a certain number of them are of working age, right? So
So
say 4 billion are of working age, and say some are traditional women who don't work, right? Because they do their job as being mothers, right? And taking care of the household. So, call it 4 billion, maybe somewhere
So it'd still be 20%.
Okay, yeah. That's a huge number.
So in 1929, during the Great Depression, one of the worst depressions we've had in 100 and something years, it was 29% unemployment rate.
Yeah.
So it's like I see the trends, and I agree with you that.
But here's the big but to it, right? And I don't know the answer. I really don't know. I wish, please comment below, right? And tell us what you think. But every technology that has happened so far has done nothing but expand the pie, create more prosperity, and create more jobs.
Yeah. So what I think is going to happen is that there's going to be more prosperity. There's going to be more opportunity for those that know how to use it, and that already have kind of like an understanding, or they're learning. They're working to like really kind of get a grip of what's happening and implementing it into their business and using it as an asset. But a lot of people, that maybe ignore it or not really paying attention to it, they could be the elevator operator.
Yeah. You know what's sort of an interesting proxy for it is when you look at old houses. I mean, I look at houses all the time, right? This is my business. You look at old houses, they have very small closets.
Mm-hmm.
You look at new houses, they have very large closets.
Yeah.
People have a lot more clothing nowadays. Why is that? Well, because of automation, because of outsourcing and making the clothing overseas and the sophisticated sewing equipment and looms and textile equipment, right? It's made clothing much cheaper. And so people just get more, and that's more prosperity. That's a bigger pie. That's good news, right? So maybe that's what AI is going to do. It's just going to create a lot more prosperity, and I'm sure that will happen, and that'll offset the unemployment.
Well,
problem.
so one thing that I think could happen is that the companies that are already implementing it, that are already spitting off cash, they're going to have a web of companies below them that are going to have different businesses, because if you can, 20, 30 years ago, you needed thousands of employees to have $1 billion company.
Yeah.
Now maybe it's 100, right?
Much fewer.
In 10 years, it might be 5 people.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you already have one really big successful enterprise and you're like, hey, I'm making $1 million a month, let's allocate $50K a month or $100K a month into these 5 businesses. And we're going to have this person, this person, this person, this person running each business.
Right.
I mean, there's going to be like the haves are going to explode.
Sure.
And like the middle class, I think that is implementing it now, at least learning about these trends, are going to start to move into the haves.
That's true. However, what happens with all that new money that's created for the haves? They spend it or they invest it. Right?
Invest. I think that a lot of them are going to be investing.
They do
sure.
both. So they buy a new Gulfstream jet, and Gulfstream is in South Carolina, and a lot of people are going to build those planes, right? Americans, right? So there will be more demand for that. They're going to buy more stuff. They're going to consume more. And there's this famous TED Talk by a venture capitalist who talked about how the rich don't contribute that much to the economy. And he leaves out this giant point. There's this huge point he completely misses in the video because he talks about, he says, look, I'm rich. I'm not going to buy 3,000 cars, okay? I don't need 3,000 cars. So I'm not going to stimulate the economy that much with my consumption. Yes, I consume more than a poor person, but not that much more. Okay, fine. But your money does something. Money does not sleep, right? So it goes into investments, and those investments create a bigger capital pool for other businesses to start or grow.
Right.
And that grows the pie and grows the economy. So, overall, this may be the biggest prosperity boom ever coming our way. I don't know. I'm with the question still.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of how it plays out.
Yeah, I don't have big opinions on this yet. I'm just questioning it.
Yeah. Do you think that there will be universal basic income? Do you think that will be required, or do you think there's going to be it won't really be that necessary because of the opportunity?
That's a great segue because what happens with any of these revolutions, and if we're in the AI revolution and the biotech revolution and all of these other tech revolutions right now, which we arguably are, what happens is there's always this adjustment period, and that's what kills everybody, right? And that adjustment period, whether it be the housing market or the general economy or the job market, tends to be very generally 18 to 24 months. So once you get past that period, things start to fall into place again and realign. People start to get different jobs, money trickles through the system, and I do think, and some of my most libertarian friends actually think that a UBI, a universal basic income, is going to be a required thing to pay people, say, for example, in today's world, maybe $1,200 a month, $1,500 a month, so they can meet their basic needs and they are living, and then they can do things from there. And, there are some actual, I've really I'm against this because I'm against big government and, government is usually massively inefficient at whatever they do, right? But, there are some cases for this because if you want people to take risk, and go out and start new businesses and pioneer new industries and do new things, if they have their basic needs met so they know they're not going to starve, they're not going to be on the street, right? They're going to survive, right? A UBI gives them that. It gives them a floor. And then from that floor, as long as they're not losers and as long as they're not drinking beer, and sitting in front of the TV all day, right? They're going to go out and do something and maybe take a risk that they otherwise wouldn't because they didn't want to, fear becoming completely broke.
Yeah.
Right?
There's going to be some interesting changes. There was I think it was I don't know if it was in Calgary, somewhere up north. They did a UBI.
Yeah,
40 years ago.
There are a couple experiments like this.
But what happened was that the landlords found out and they just jack rents and basically absorbed that UBI.
Yeah, well, that's what happens too.
Yeah.
I mean, like Cash for Clunkers. Remember that stupid program?
Yeah.
Right. All that did is make the price of used cars skyrocket, right?
Yeah.
And whenever Biden says, "Oh, we got to give more aid to college students," the colleges just raise the prices to absorb it.
Yeah.
Sellers of houses, let's give first-time buyers a 10% tax credit. Okay, well, the sellers will just have more demand, and they'll raise the prices. The only way you solve any problem in markets is you have to increase the supply or reduce the demand. Otherwise, the price is going up.
Or they have a CBDC in which a certain amount is only allocated to food or a certain amount is only allocated to certain things.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's pretty scary. The CBDC is really checkmate against the human population.
For sure.
If we don't have spending freedom, that is the ultimate invasion of privacy. If they can control what time I spend money, where I spend money, if there's a quarantine or a lockdown, you can only spend money between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. within 1 mile of your house.
Yeah.
So you can't go anywhere, or you have to live in this 15-minute city and your money's no good outside of 15 minutes from your house. Can you imagine the kind of tyranny that they could unleash on us with the CBDC? It's shocking.
Yeah, well, the Fed now, I think, comes out next week, the 21st. I think it was like they're integrating it. They already started slow drip, but I think it's like should be fully the first step of it, which isn't CBDC, but it's kind of like the plumbing.
It's the plumbing. Yeah, exactly. I know.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary.
Yeah, it'll be really fascinating to see kind of like how that whole. I think it's definitely going to play out. I do think a UBI is going to be required, whether I like it or don't like it. Facts are facts. If you look at where city crime is right now, this is when people. I mean, you go look at the stock market, be like, stocks look fine. Everything looks kind of relatively fine. Real estate's fine, and still. The crime is where it is now.
The universal basic income is the way to force adoption of the central bank digital currency. Because if your only income, or even if it's not your only income, comes on your phone, right, into your CBDC account, and this is how you spend money by doing your phone like you do with Apple Pay or Google Pay, you're going to be forced into the CBDC right there.
Yeah. If I went to South Beach and I was like, here's my phone. Download this app, and I'll give you $100. And I told 100 people to do it. Out of 100 people, I bet 90 would do it. 80 would do it. Right?
99 would do it.
And you're like, okay, I'll take $100, right? Yeah. Now you put that out in front of 330 million Americans, 200 million plus are over 18. You're gonna have 150 million plus people. You're gonna have a certain percentage that are gonna be like, there's no way in hell I'm doing it.
Yeah.
But you're gonna have a majority that are gonna say, yeah, I'm gonna download that.
I think probably. Everybody will do it. They'll just think that, look, I still have cash outside of the system, so I can still use my cash. The problem is, though, when they're just eroding cash. Some businesses don't even take cash anymore.
Yeah.
And under legal tender clause, they should have to, because it's for all debts, public and private. It says that right on the currency, right? And, you should be able to force them to take cash. Right? You have to sell me the product, you have to take cash.
Yeah.
And in countries like Sweden, last time I was there, no merchants take cash. It's credit cards only. That's it. So, it's the CBDC thing is really a scary scenario that could play out with that.
How do you think it'll play out? You think we're going to see like regional banks start to fall, then we're going to see big banks absorb? There's going to be
consolidation in banking.
Handful of banks, and it's going to be easy to implement it. How do you see it kind of playing out?
I think the UBI is the way to implement it. That's the real easy way. Remember, and they're teeing this up. Remember when COVID started, the first thing you saw is you saw a bunch of articles that talked about how handling cash is dirty and could spread. So by touching coins or dollar bills, you could get the disease, right? And everybody was scared, oh, I don't want to touch any cash, right? So I'm not going to use cash. Businesses actually ran out of cash.
And coins.
Okay,
and all
they
that
couldn't give you change for things. Remember that? Yeah. And so then the second layer was, oh, now we've got these relief checks the government is sending out to everybody. Guess what? We can't find people. We can't find people to give them their money. Well, it's funny. The post office can find people, and you pretty much run the post office. UPS and FedEx can find people, and the IRS can certainly find people, and the cops can find people, but you can't find them to give them their money. That's odd, right? And so they were teeing up this narrative to say, look, we've got to be able to do it electronically on the phones, right? And as soon as they give you the money that way through your phone, then, and soon it'll be through a chip in your wrist, right? Or in your head, and maybe it'll be a Neuralink, right?
Yeah.
Elon Musk will make a deal with the government and finally totally sell out. That's the way they get the control, right? That's the way it comes. And then they'll incentivize the employers. They'll say, oh, you got to pay people through the CBDC. You can't pay them any other way. You know, at first it'll be like there's an incentive to do it. It's so much
tax
more
deduction
convenient.
or whatever you're
yeah,
like.
yeah, one, just convenience, you know, and no processing fees or whatever. And they'll just slowly erode our freedom that way.
Yeah, but if you think about how crazy it would be, the ability for them to basically withdraw tax. Be like, oh, like you have, you know, you made $100,000 gross last year. Be like, yeah, but I had $120,000 in write-offs. You know, I was hiring employees. I had to buy a work truck. I had to do this and that. Be like, yeah, but we're just going to take that 20 grand
right out of your phone,
and then you dispute it with us.
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, well, what do you got to do? You know what I mean? Like,
you know what's even scarier than that, and a lot of people aren't paying attention to this, but I've done some shows on my podcast and YouTube about civil forfeiture, and the government has massive rights in an area called civil forfeiture, where you can be accused of a crime, not convicted, just accused, and they can freeze your assets, they can take your assets, and good luck trying to get them back. There's a story of an old lady who owns a restaurant in, I don't know, North Dakota or something, and some nondescript restaurant, and they accused her of money laundering because she didn't want to take credit cards. So that's pressure to accept the CBDC right there, right? And be in a cashless system. And she said no, she didn't want to pay the fees on the credit card. So she just took, it was cash only little diner, no big, nothing restaurant, right? They arrested her and seized her assets under civil forfeiture. And it took her years to go through the system. And good luck fighting the government with an unlimited budget.
Yeah.
You know, it's
I mean, there's a
scary.
situation happened about a year and a half ago in Beverly Hills. There was a big vault, and they had gold, and they had like hundreds of locals that had little drop boxes or little boxes there. They had gold and jewelry. The jewelry shops would store valuables and things like that. They said one person there was doing money laundering or some type of fraud.
So they shut down the whole place and seized
everybody's assets for like 18 months, and like
Unbelievable.
I don't know if everyone got their money back or they got their assets back, but yeah, I mean they have that authority. Like, who's going to tell them what to do?
It's incredibly scary. We must constantly fight against the government's rights. I mean, look, I was just in Greece. That's called the birthplace of democracy, right? And it took a long time for humans to get to the point where they had more rights than the government, ostensibly. The first real example of this, I think, was the Magna Carta around, 1100, right? And then it was the beautiful United States Constitution, okay? And that's the time when the government said, look, you as people have more rights than we do. We're here because you're letting us govern you, right? And that was a beautiful thing for humanity. And a lot of countries, fortunately, copied that example. But that trend is now going the other way very quickly. And we have just got to be vigilant against that. If the CBDC is implemented, and it's definitely coming, it is going to be checkmate.
Do you think it's just going to
ultimate power?
That's going to be the move? Is just going to be like a UBI and a graceful kind of like merge, or do you think we're going to start to see some of these regionals fall?
The banks?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it may be where everybody's bank account is, instead of at the banks, is at the Federal Reserve directly. So that could happen. I don't know how that'll play out. I mean, you might have studied it more than me, but certainly that's been talked about, where everybody would just have an account at the Federal Reserve. That would be your bank instead of Bank of America, right? But it's hard for me to imagine that they would just put all the banks out of business like that.
Yeah.
I mean, the banks are a huge lobby. I don't know. They're going to give them a part in it somehow. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know how it's going to play out either. I do think that the regionals could be in trouble, especially like if you look at commercial real estate and they own 70% of that debt.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it's like you look at commercial real estate, you look at the auto loan situation, you look at all of this debt held by these regionals and all the money getting sucked out of regionals right now as interest rates rise and consumers have less money. It's
Look, the powers that be, no matter what, want consolidation.
Yeah.
They want consolidation in banking, in technology, in everything, because it's easier to control a small number of companies that they're exchanging favors with. I mean, these disgusting big tech companies, whether they be, whatever, right? They are in bed with the government. They spend fortunes lobbying the government, right? Which is essentially, it should be just called bribing the government, because that's what it is. Okay, that's what a lobbyist does, is bribe the government. Okay, and so they're constantly exchanging favors. Hey, look, we're not going to bust you up for antitrust, even though you should be, right? You're definitely a monopoly, right? Pretty much. I mean, you have 70 some odd % of all the countries and world's internet traffic. Like, how is that not a monopoly that antitrust laws were created to prevent, right? Well, the government just sort of looks the other way because they're getting a lot of favors from a lot of spying, a lot of intelligence. And so sadly, this consolidation is very dangerous. There's a huge difference between Wall Street and the corporatocracy and Main Street and small business. Okay, we need more Main Street small business and less Wall Street and corporatocracy.
Yeah, I don't see how that actually happens. Like, I agree with you. That's what we need.
Yeah.
I don't see it happening.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I would trade everything in for that to happen.
Yeah, right.
Like on a dime.
Yeah.
But that would be like, you ever go on TikTok and you see like those clips of kids in high school in the 90s and early 2000s and the world back then, where it was like no one's on their cell phone, everyone's in the moment.
Right,
everyone was like, it's like, it gives me a little goosebumps thinking about how great the world was back then.
Yeah.
But it's continuing
But
to
the
move
funny
into
thing
this-
is, you go on TikTok to see that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's an irony, right?
That's the funny thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that is where all business, that's kind of like where everything is heading.
Yeah.
But I do think that having that, realization that is what's happening is going to push, I think, a lot of people that are in America looking at other places and, potentially getting second homes and other passports and things like that, and kind of playing a global play on the future.
And that's definitely a trend that has been increasing. I mean, it's a lot of people are looking for greener pastures, but I got to tell you, on balance, I think America's still pretty great.
I love America.
Even though it is declining, I think it's got a long way to fall before many other countries would be better. And look, they're going to fall too. I mean, they're all susceptible to this. This is not a American thing. This is a globalist thing. I mean, the Rothschilds and George Soros and all the rest, they know that this has to be a worldwide phenomenon. Take for the example of Janet Yellen. When she took over as Treasury Secretary, she immediately attacked Bitcoin, because she said, it's used for drug smuggling and money laundering, right? Well, you know what the biggest currency is that's used for drug smuggling and money laundering? It's the US dollar. Mm-hmm. Okay? Like, it's not Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's the US dollar. So why don't you attack that? Okay? Yeah. And
she's like, great idea.
And then the next thing she talked about was how we need to shut down all of these tax havens around the world, and there needs to be a unified corporate tax so people have nowhere to run. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it so there's nowhere to run. I call this the economic Berlin Wall. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I predicted about 12 years ago that they would build an economic Berlin Wall I mean, look, first, understand, why was the Berlin Wall built? I remember my first time there, I spent 6 hours at a place called Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin. And the Berlin Wall was built basically on a weekend because the communists were seeing this massive brain drain as people were leaving East Berlin for the West, where they could be rewarded for their talents and rewarded for their ambition. And the communists didn't reward for that. So everybody was leaving. Duh. You can imagine that, right? And what gets rewarded gets repeated. So California, people have been leaving California because California is not rewarding that. They're taxing it. They're rewarding loserdom and, people being flaky dependents, right? And so they have a brain drain. And I predicted they would start building an economic Berlin Wall around California to keep the money in. And they're doing that just around the world. China has been doing that for a long time because they don't allow capital flight very easily. You can't take your money out of China very easily. And the U.S. is engaging in the same thing.
I know there's some tax havens that people use like St. Kitts and Nevis, Puerto Rico,
Isle
Cayman.
of Man, there's a bunch of them.
Do you think that those are going to get shut down like in the coming near future? Or you think it's mainly going to be capital flight in America?
Yeah, so the reason, the way they do that, of course they can exert this political pressure a lot of different ways, but a lot of these places are in the Caribbean, right? And so the next time a hurricane rolls through the Caribbean and these places need aid, the U.S., of course, reaches out and says, we'll offer aid if you do this for us. And it's a quid pro quo, and they say, look, you got to turn over all the bank accounts. You got to provide banking information. They did this with Switzerland several years ago under the Obama administration. And so, they're making it where there's like no place to hide. And look, I want to state clearly that I am not in favor of these people dodging taxes, hiding money, and doing money laundering, right? Because a lot of people do really shady stuff, and they should be paying their fair share. Mostly who's doing that is these big companies like, they do all sorts of shady stuff that's legal, right? Because they've lobbied Congress to make their shady stuff legal. They have their intellectual property company based in Amsterdam or Ireland, and somehow we all know Apple is in California. They have a $5 billion headquarters, but somehow all the money is made offshore, right? I don't know, how do they do that, right? It's just a shocking scam. And these companies are ripping you off because you should have the benefit of their tax revenue to, build your roads and fund the government. Instead, the government's attacking you middle-class person, right? It's just a total elitist scam.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it really is interesting. The more when I see comments like, "Oh, eat the rich and eat the rich," people think that the rich person is their guy driving a Bentley. No, that's a broke guy.
The rich person is Tim Cook, Jeff Bezos, right? Yeah,
he's in a blacked out Escalade. You probably don't even notice him with a fleet of security. Like he's like you being rich today is like 100 million plus or more. Not the guy worth $300,000 a year, making $400,000 a year, making a $5,000 a month car payment.
That guy's just getting by in today's world. Okay? Mark Zuckerberg spends $21 million a year on security. Can you imagine being hated so much that you have to spend $21 million a year on security?
It's nuts.
That's insane.
80 grand a day, you're just dropping on security.
It's incredible, right? And it's because these are the modern thieves that are stealing your life, right? That's what they're doing. Everybody listening is getting burned by these people, these elites. They're not the rich, they're the elites. There's a difference. I interviewed on the show the author of a great book called Davos Man. And it's all about the World Economic Forum, which of course is held in Davos. And we all know the Great Reset agenda and, the 15-minute city agenda. And before that, they had, UN 21 or what was it called? You know about that probably. And they have all these agendas where you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, basically. And these are the people that are taking advantage of you. These are the people causing the inflation. These are the people that are just raping the system and paying nothing in. Right? These are the people who talk to you, tell you, you have to cut back. You have to be more energy efficient. You have to reduce your carbon footprint. You can't drive an SUV, but we're flying private jets to Davos, right?
Yeah, like Bloomberg, I think he has like
so
6 jets, 2
hypocritical.
helicopters.
Yeah. Michael Bloomberg.
Yeah.
Total hypocrites. Yeah.
Yeah,
All
but
these
then you
people.
go on the website and he's like has all these like his whole plan for like a cleaner future. It's like it's really kind of funny to look at what he's saying that everyone else has to do, but what he gets to do is basically, upgrade his jets
Do as
every
I
year.
say, not as I do.
Yeah.
I mean, you look like I like Richard Branson, for example. I've met him a couple times. I've been to his island. He's great, right? But even he's an environmentalist. How are you an environmentalist when you own a cruise line and an airline?
Yeah.
I don't know how you reconcile that, but whatever.
Yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio is like one of the huge
with his
advocates
400-foot yacht, right?
with a 400-foot yacht, a private jet, and an island that he's like, but I have solar panels on this island.
It's complete absurdity.
Yeah, it's really it's going to be very interesting to kind of watch how this transitions. But I do think that what's going to happen is that there's going to be such a big flight of capital over the coming couple decades of people moving money from one safe area, quote unquote safe area, to another, to dodge all these claims. I think they said Bloomberg was saying $200 trillion will be needed for this climate tax plan.
So let's talk about what that means, $200 trillion. And then I want to make sure before we go, we talk about what people can do, because I do have an action step. Okay? I mean, there's a lot of action steps, but I got one that's a biggie, okay? So $200 trillion. So put that in, most people don't know what that means, okay? Like, put it in perspective. The economy of the United States produces a total value of just over $20 trillion a year, okay? Mm-hmm. So that's 10 times the national GDP, right? The world economy is somewhere around 100 trillion a year. That's 2 times the entire world's production every year, right? That's how much it is. So hopefully that helps. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I like it's to the point to where they wanted to increase property taxes. They wanted to do all these new restrictions for travel, for flights, paying carbon credits, like all of these different newfound costs that are going to be coming. Shipping and distribution is going to go through a new, process for taxation.
All that means is the price of everything you buy gets higher, and your lifestyle goes down.
And so when I talk about like inflation on the channel, I'm looking at a lot of these changes with energy, with all these new taxes, all these new things that are coming. Biden wanted to talk. He was, I think, talking about unrealized gains, taxing unrealized gains on like stocks and other things,
and wealth taxes. So in other words, you don't have to sell the stock just because you own it. You have to pay tax.
You just got to cut us a check.
Cut us a check because you own it. And think about how totally fucking stupid that is, right? You earned the money and paid taxes on it to buy the stock.
Yeah.
You paid taxes all along the way, and the company itself pays a zillion taxes. It employs people, pays payroll taxes. All those people pay taxes on their income. Right? This is absurd. But then just by virtue of the fact that you own the stock, not that you sold it or made money, you have to pay tax. That's a wealth tax. That's insane.
It's really nuts.
Yeah, it's just insane. And somehow, John, this will apply only to the middle and upper middle people, but never to the elites.
Yeah.
Trust me, Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, they will not pay, or Eric Schmidt, or the Google founders, they won't pay any of that tax, but we will.
Yeah. Well, because what they'll do is like they have those Cook Islands Trust. They're like, oh, I don't own it. This trust over
some
here.
Trust.
Some New Zealand owns it, and they decided it's not the best time to sell right now.
I know.
Yeah,
it's
it'll
totally absurd.
So you think we're going to likely see continued inflation?
Massive. Look. When you spend, you have to have inflation, right? Mm-hmm. And by the way, we talked earlier about pivoting and interest rates, right? One thing we've got to remember is that the government has to pay interest on its debt. Okay, so when interest rates are high, the government gets burned because it has to pay much higher rates on its own debt that it's using to finance through T-bills, okay? So the government has an incentive to see lower interest rates. They'll let us all get burned by inflation. Well, they enjoy lower interest rates, okay? So that's why I think ultimately rates will settle. And I think, for example, we'll see mortgage rates in the 5% range. I think that's...
When would rough target?
2
years? Or would you...
Yeah, within a year or two. I mean, look, the Fed's going to push us into a recession officially.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we're in one now, but it's kind of hard to argue that we are because... and I did see your video about the unemployment numbers and so forth, but that'll take an hour to discuss. So, they'll push us into an official recession, and then they'll pivot, or maybe they'll pivot a little bit before that, but we'll still go into one. And
but don't normally the recessions really speed up after the pivot.
I don't know. It's so complex. This is why economics is known as the dismal science.
Yeah.
Because it is just so hard to predict the actions of literally billions of actors. You just can't do it.
Right.
I mean, there's an old funny saying that says that the study of economics was invented to make astrology look respectable. Okay. Yeah. And so it's hard to tell, but ultimately I think rates will settle a bit and they will go down. And as a proxy for that, I'll say mortgage rates, I'll call them somewhere in the 5% range next couple of years. I don't know. Interest rates are very hard to predict. But where were we going with that before the interest rate thing? Where were we getting to with that?
We went from taxation, inflation.
Yeah. So I think the future is very much inflationary. There might be little bouts of deflation or disinflation in there, but the macro big trend is inflationary. And the big action step I want to leave people with, one of them they can take as massively powerful, is a strategy I developed 18 years ago. I call it inflation-induced debt destruction. You've probably heard me talk about it. And basically what you do is you follow the same business plan that the government and the central banks use. Those are the two most powerful entities the human race has ever known, governments and central banks. Their plan is inflation because they benefit from inflation. Mm-hmm. So if the U.S. owes $1 trillion to China, for example, if you have 10% inflation in 1 year or 2 years or 6 months, doesn't matter how long it takes, but say there's 10% inflation, that means that the U.S. pays that $1 trillion debt back in cheaper dollars.
Yeah.
So they borrowed it at the value of today's dollars. They pay it back at the value of tomorrow's cheaper dollars. So they basically got a $100 billion discount on their debt. Mm-hmm. Now, everybody watching and listening can use this too. You borrow money on income property, income producing real estate. You get it at today's dollars. You pay it back at tomorrow's cheaper dollars through what I call inflation-induced debt destruction. And this could go badly if you had to pay the debt yourself. But thankfully, with income property, we outsource the debt obligation to people called tenants. They pay the debt. And we ask them ideally if they'll pay us a little extra every month. We call that positive cash flow. So maybe they pay you $100 extra every month, positive cash flow, plus they're paying down your debt for you. And that creates an environment where you can have basically infinite return. And income property is I call it the world's most historically proven asset class because it has these special multidimensional characteristics that other asset classes just don't have. Yeah. The power to get that inflation-induced debt destruction is like the hidden wealth creator.
Yeah, I love real estate. Yeah. You can do forced value add, you can increase rents, you can do cash out refis, which is non-taxable. Like there's so many different ways in which you can make money in real estate.
Absolutely.
And it's an incredible, I think one of the easiest ways for people to understand real estate is, study it for a month, go out there, look at 100 deals, maybe one makes sense, buy it. You'll learn a hell of a lot.
Right.
Like you'll learn a hell of a lot. And I think that what we're going to start to see here around like mom and pop property owners, I'm actually really curious as to your take on this because mom and pops, they own, basically 70+% of the duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, which is a perfect first deal, in my opinion, for a lot of renters right now.
I mean, mom and pop landlords own approximately, don't quote me on this exactly, but about 17, 18 million properties in the country. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like you start to look at the amount of wealth that's going to be transitioning over the coming decade. A lot of that, I believe, is going to hit the market. I think a lot of inventory is going to start hitting the market. And if you're a renter right now and you're like, maybe I want to never, maybe I don't want to be a renter in 20 years. Maybe I want to buy that duplex or that rental property. Like this is the perfect time, I believe, to you start shopping around and seeing where the opportunity is.
It's always a good time to be learning about income property. Okay, real estate is the most historically proven asset class. But what's interesting about what you said is not many people are talking about the wealth transfer that's going to happen through inheritance So, baby boomers, the oldest baby boomers probably won't be around in 15 years. And all of that wealth that they have, and they have a substantial amount of wealth, is going to transfer to their millennial children, okay? And the interesting thing to think about is if they have 30-year fixed-rate mortgages that they got 2 years ago, and they paid 2.6% on that mortgage, if that wealth transfer happens 15 years from now when there's still 13 years left on that mortgage,
Yeah.
okay, look at that scenario, right? And say at the time mortgage rates are 9%, okay, which would be realistic because ultimately in an inflationary environment, you have to have higher rates to try and
Offset
fight
it.
the inflation beast, right? And so I do think there will be a pivot before that, and there will be many over time. But ultimately, rates are going higher, and inflation is going higher. That's my macro, big picture perspective. So those kids that inherit that property with this 2.6% mortgage in a 9% environment, that mortgage looks like an incredible asset
For sure.
because it's super cheap. It's 1/4 the price of money at that time. So the likelihood of them liquidating that property is somewhat low. This is what I talk about when I talk about the poison pill that the Federal Reserve has put into the real estate market. They have literally created the environment to limit inventory for 28 years. Like, think about that. Unless the only things that could change that is, number one, some way to construct a lot more housing supply at cheaper prices, which doesn't seem likely at all. Number two, low mortgage rates that are back in that COVID era 3% range. That means that the mortgages out there now are not that valuable because they're normal. You can still get another mortgage at 3%, so this is not valuable anymore. What makes that mortgage valuable is like a bond. The mortgage acts like a bond because in a market where interest rates go down, the value of bonds goes up. And when interest rates go up, the value of bonds go down, right? So that's the way the mortgage works. If you have high mortgage rates, all the low rate mortgages become more valuable and people are less likely to sell the properties that those mortgages are attached to, creating an inventory shortage. That's what we have now. Nobody wants to sell their house because the mortgages they have are too desirable.
So I agree with a large part of that.
Yeah.
The only thing that I'm thinking about on the backside of that is the average person stays in a home for 8 years.
Yeah.
Right.
That's true.
And so when you look at, okay, they stay for 8 years, 40% of all mortgages were taken between 2020 and 2021.
Right.
Right. Which is, I mean, you're talking 24 months, 40% of all mortgages.
Yeah.
Average down payment.
That's huge.
Average
Yeah.
down payment, 10%.
Yep.
Right. Cost of sale, 8% with realtor fees, closing costs, transfer taxes. So they basically had like 2% equity, give or take.
Well, they did, but they have more now
Well,
because the prices went up. Now they've softened a little bit over the last year, okay, but 0.8%. I mean, there's hardly any softening, right?
right. But there's a lot happening in the economy structurally
Yeah.
that the current, what I'm looking at anyway, a lot of markets are either booming right now or some of them are kind of sagging.
Right.
It's very unstable, right? And so these mortgages are for sure are assets, 2%, 3%, there's no doubt about it. But what happens with all these people and they step into an inflationary environment, they can't refinance their property or they can't sell it, they're underwater, they can't refi.
Well,
a lot of people use their
gonna
home as a
wanna
piggy
refi
bank.
because they can't duplicate the mortgage.
Well, taking a home equity line of credit, like taking lines of credit.
Yeah. So they could do a HELOC on top of the existing mortgage.
have equity.
But they're going to have to pay they have to have equity, of course, and then they have to pay a higher rate on that HELOC assuming rates are higher at the time they want that money.
Right. Yeah. So basically it puts people into a position to where that mortgage is, as I mentioned, an asset. But if they can't, access liquidity in that home and they step into financial difficulties during inflation, no matter how much they love that asset, it could pose a problem, an opportunity.
Exactly what happens. The lenders will be forced to do workouts. So just like they did during the Great Recession and just like they did in the 90s and in all other times, the lenders are forced into a position where they have to give them either a moratorium on payments.
Or like a 40-year, 50-year
or
mortgage.
extend the loan or do a workout or do a short sale because the lenders don't want the properties back.
Yeah.
The only reason the lenders would want the properties back and not be incentivized to do a workout is if, number one, the property had a lot of equity in it, or number two, the price had gone up. And that means a lot of equity. It's the same thing, really. Okay? That's when the lender wants the property back. That's when the lender becomes aggressive on wanting to foreclose. But if there's no equity in the property and the borrower can't make the payment, the lender's going to work with them. That's just reality. I'm a lender. I've been in that position as a lender, okay? I mean, I loan on real estate deals all the time. And if you're in a position where there's nothing to get by taking the property, you're going to work with the borrower. There's no other thing to do, right? So they're just going to do workouts like they did before. They did millions of them during the Great Recession.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that, because you're looking at like tens of millions of properties where banks are already going through financial difficulty.
The banks are, but remember, the banks don't hold a lot of these mortgages.
Yeah, they sell them.
Okay, they're sold to bondholders and mortgage-backed securities, right? So the commercial mortgage-backed securities market is an epic disaster. That is going to put a lot more pressure on banks. It already has. I mean, look at Silicon Valley Bank, right? But that's going to get worse. The commercial market is going to get much worse. But for the residential market, everybody still needs a house.
Yeah.
And there is a housing shortage, and the only way it can really be cured is with much lower interest rates, which would cause the market to light on fire again.
Yeah.
Or creation of new housing stock. And the creation of new stock is, I mean, there's a little bit, but it's not nearly enough to solve the problem. Or here's one more solution. Reduction in population. Maybe people get this shot in the arm and that reduces the population. God forbid, right? But Bill Gates said he wanted that. So, I won't go down that rabbit hole. Maybe you want to edit that out because the thought police might be coming after me. But
Dave or Satya.
Yeah. Make a note there at that spot. It's a tough situation. I just think ultimately they have less spending money. They can't do as much. Their lifestyle goes down. I mean, look, 25% of the mortgages in the country are at or below 3%. That is super cheap. It's much cheaper than renting a house. It's much cheaper than buying a new house. 65% of the mortgages in the country are at or below 4%. And 42% of all the homes in the country are free and clear with no mortgage at all.
Yeah.
It's hard to get a lot of distress out of that market. Where do the distressed sellers come from? I mean, it's you got to have distressed sellers if you want to have a crash.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to kind of, there's so many moving bits and pieces and parts to the economy.
No question.
Where it's like, like in 2020, I thought we were going to have a crash.
Yeah.
Like that was my take. I'm like, we're going to definitely have a recession. And
good reason to think that. A lot of people thought it.
And at that point, that was what happened. Like we did see a quick crash in March and a rocket ship because of all the policies and protocols and all these things that happened.
Exactly. So, Ken McElroy is my business partner. He's written some great books in the Rich Dad series. He's a well-known guy, okay? And his YouTube channel, during the beginning of, he was saying that the market is over, it's going to crash, write this year off, don't do anything, just wait till next year, right? And see what happens. And later, he told me on my show that he was wrong. And the reason he said he was wrong is telling. He said, I didn't anticipate the Fed's reaction. And that's what everybody has to realize. We are in a centrally planned economy. And the Fed is always going to react to whatever circumstances are out there. So, if things get bad and this and that happens and unemployment increases, they're going to be pressured to lower interest rates, okay? And they're always going to react. The central planners always react. And so with that in mind, you just have to account for that. If they react and lower rates with the limited supply we only have about 1/3 or maybe 40% of the number of homes on the market now that we need to be in a normal market, not a bad market, not a down market, not a buyer's market, a normal market. We need almost 3 times the amount of inventory we have.
Yeah.
What's going to cause those people to sell with those cheap mortgages? They're very likely to experience financial hardship with super cheap mortgages that are cheaper than rent payments, that are cheaper than buying a new house payments. And if they do, the Fed is likely to react with lower rates that makes their equity increase.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of see how this whole thing kind of plays out because, like in 2020, one second here, in 2020 when all that stuff happened, everything happened. Like Ken was saying, Ken was like, oh, yeah, maybe the market's gonna crash, maybe write the year off. I was thinking the same exact thing, but now when I'm looking at what's happening right now with, sure, I agree with you that a lot of people have tons of equity and the market is positioned in areas that are, much stronger than they've ever been. But then there's also all these new policies and all these different things that I'm looking at. I'm like, okay, well, will this actually happen? Is this speculative? Is it going to get completely written off? Is the Fed going to do another one of these musical chair games where they do that 30, 40, 50 year or 40, 50 year mortgage?
Right.
Are they going to force these clean energy upgrades on these properties?
Well, they're going to do that. The ESG thing is politically correct.
Yeah. I had Jasmine on the show at Solar Energy. So they get direct, I don't know if you watched that full episode.
I saw that show,
they get direct funding from the government, 0 to 1%.
Yeah. So what does that direct funding do? Well, number one, it makes the house more expensive because people have to put solar, so they got to comply with new regulations. House gets more expensive, okay? Because there's more stuff on it, right? But also the government giving them that cheap money, that's inflationary. Where's the government get that money? They create it out of thin air. Money is lent into existence, right? If you go down to the rabbit hole of understanding how the system works and the plumbing works and read The Creature from Jekyll Island by J. Edward Griffin and all of that stuff, right? Money is lent into existence. So that money that is financing those solar panels is created out of thin air. That's inflationary, right? Inflation makes the price of housing go up and everything else go up. And it puts pressure on them to increase rates to offset the inflation. It's just a game that has got so many moving parts. It's just something that keeps people up at night.
do you think that stuff you said you think it will happen? You think it's going to be something that's going to happen in the next 10 years, or do you think it's going to be sooner than that, where these upgrades start becoming? I know in New York they're already starting January 1st.
Oh, I think it's a gradual thing. I mean, I think they do one thing, then it's another thing. I mean, years ago it was you got to have low flow shower heads, then low flow toilets, and everybody was complaining about the cost for all of that stuff, and then they were complaining about the water heater regulations, and then the earthquake regulations in California. They were complaining about that, and they're just constantly doing these things. They're just making houses just more and more expensive with all this stuff they keep requiring. I mean, look, it would be like old cars, right? Old cars didn't have airbags. They didn't have anti-lock brakes. They didn't have push-button windows, and they were usually stick shift, not automatic, and they were cheaper.
Yeah.
Because they had less stuff. They're loading these houses with more and more stuff.
What's the best way to make money on this whole thing for the average person right now, you think?
Inflation-induced debt destruction. Buy a lot of assets that are indexed to inflation. Real estate's the best one, okay? Finance it with 3-decade-long fixed-rate debt, and when that debt gets cheaper, refinance that debt. When that pivot happens, be ready, refinance that debt, and let your tenant pay the debt for you.
So are you a fan more of single family, residential multifamily, or larger commercial?
Single family is absolutely my preference because the humble single family home is what everybody wants, and it is not oversupplied like apartments are. Apartments are very oversupplied right now. Okay, now it'll work its way through the system, and those vacancies will reduce, and the rents will get more solid, but it's going to take a couple years because a lot of apartments were constructed. A lot of them are hitting the market now or hit the market in the last year or so, and there is a glut of apartment units for sale, okay? But remember, apartments are usually a transitory tenant, where a single-family home is a long-term tenant or buyer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do you like, what would you say would be, you would just go off the rent metrics for
the rent to value ratio. Of course, there's more to it than that.
Yeah,
I
of
mean,
course.
listen to my podcast and YouTube channel.
For
and
sure, we're gonna plug it all below.
come to my live events, and
Yeah.
we'll be glad to talk to our investment counselors. We'll help you with that.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you like Alabama, you like Florida, you like what were the other markets?
Tennessee, Arkansas. Arkansas is the most landlord-friendly state in the country. Interestingly,
What was it like? Did you have any evictions in Arkansas? What was that process like during the height of everything?
during the eviction moratorium, you couldn't evict people at all,
Yeah.
right? But the thing that people don't understand about that, everybody was, coming to us. Oh my God, there's an eviction moratorium. They're gonna, everybody's gonna stop paying. No, that didn't happen at all.
Yeah.
Most people just paid the rent. Very few stopped paying because it would affect their credit. Okay, and you could get a judgment against them. You could still take your tenant to court and sue them for the money they owe you. You just couldn't kick them out.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't understand that distinction.
yeah,
Okay. So all the tenants that wanted to go forward in life and eventually buy a house, they kept paying their rent like clockwork.
Yeah.
I didn't have a single tenant that did that to me personally. Okay. Now, we have thousands of clients. So, a couple stories, I heard a couple stories from clients that took advantage of the eviction moratorium. But it was not a drop in the bucket. It was a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
The amount of that was just non-existent. It was it was a nothing burger.
It's interesting because in California, I heard that Newsom came out saying, if you don't have the money, don't pay your rent.
Yeah.
We're gonna pay. We'll take care of it.
Right.
In LA County alone, there was 800,000 tenants not paying rent,
Unbelievable.
which was
See,
because
and-
that was the narrative that was being pushed out there.
and they were rewarding them.
And Arkansas, Tennessee,
Yeah, no.
Alabama, Florida, it wasn't.
These are blue states. They don't
Yeah.
put up with that bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I mean,
Hey,
it's a
my
great
pleasure.
conversation.
It's been fun. Absolutely.
Pleasure.
Absolutely, John. Yeah, it's good,
I'm going to leave
good to meet
everyone
you in person.
Yeah, I'm going to leave all of his links below. Check out his podcast. It's a really, really cool show. Really interesting points. And till next time.